this runs on the news. Kyle Breyer, Tempe fire captain, dead, shot in the head in Old Town.
Can you describe in detail the events of your day, February 2nd, 2020?
So it was actually right before I got on the fire department. I was actually working as a security guard. So I was working in Old Town. I had gone through the Mesa Community College Fire Academy, and my captain and maybe 3-4 other guys from the Tempe Fire Department had actually come in. They came in, I got them shots. They ended up leaving the bar. They were all fine. So I get off at 1. I'm walking to the parking lot and I see this tarp over this body. I drive home, come back in the morning, and this girl who I work with, who was really good friends with Kyle Breyer, who was the Tempe fire captain, she had told me, she's like, hey, it was Kyle who had got shot last night. And I broke down because this was my fire captain in the Mesa Community College Fire Academy. He was someone I looked up to.
What actually happened?
He had left the club. They got on a golf cart and they were actually driving towards Boondocks, and a car behind them bumps into the cart, and he's sitting on the back and he's like lifting up his legs, trying not to get crushed. So as a 20-year-old kid, and he hops off, he's like, what the hell are you doing? The 20-year-old kid pulls out a Glock and just dead shoots him straight in the head. One bullet in the head, kills him for no reason. The kid drives off, hits 4 or 5 cars, and he leaves. And he was dead.
This is an episode with Andrew Kraft. Andrew's a successful young entrepreneur in real estate and former firefighter. And he shares some riveting stories from his days of being a firefighter. One of the most notable ones was right before he joined the fire department, his captain was shot in the face. And he was actually there on the scene that night. And so just a traumatic, riveting story. And Andrew's just an amazing dude. You can just feel it as he talks about kind of his journey, his relationship with his father, what it was like to be a firefighter, and some really cool stories there. But then also just how he's transitioned out of being a full-time firefighter to making multiple 6 figures a year doing what he does today. So thank you for joining another episode of the Rollercoaster Podcast. Strap in. Andrew Kraft, welcome to the Rollercoaster Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. We met about 6 weeks ago for the first time ever. Yep. Friend of a friend. Mm-hmm. And when I met you, it was clear that your life was about perfect on the surface. Mm-hmm. Like young, jacked, healthy, money. Yeah. I mean, like you've got it all going for you. Good looking, right?
Yeah.
And I walked into the studio today and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to talk to this perfect guy about. Mm-hmm. But you sat down and you said, the last month has maybe been one of the most traumatic months of my whole life.
Yeah.
So let's go there. Mm-hmm. What has happened in the last 30 days that has changed your life? I mean, let's describe, if you will, just describe some of the events that have taken place.
Yeah, so I think it was about 4 weeks ago I'd met you, about 6, and it was right around Father's Day. I was actually supposed to go down to see my dad, and then he had rescheduled for another day to go see him. And I didn't hear from him for a couple days, to reschedule a day for me to go down there. We call the neighbors, trying to figure out what's going on. I guess they had reached out to us and kind of were like, hey, we haven't seen your father coming out and, grabbing his mail. So we actually had they called the cops and kind of did a drive-by, went around the house, didn't seem like anyone was home, knocked and all that stuff. And then, we called them again the next morning. So it'd been about 5 days, and they end up breaking into the house, finding him face down. He actually had a stroke about 5 days prior, right after Father's Day. And so the cops found him, in his, vomit, laying there for 5 days, ended up having a double brain bleed with the stroke. So they rushed him to the Oro Valley Hospital. And at that point, they found out it was too far past getting neurological surgery. And they were like, hey, there's nothing that we're able to do because this brain bleed has been going on for so long. So the only way for it to resolve is for it to resolve itself, right? And it's kind of funny because you get to this point in your life where everything's going good, right? You're making money, your relationships are good, family is good. And it's like one event will happen and it's like, it just seems like your whole life can kind of turn into a whirlwind, And so we ended up getting him to the hospital. He was paralyzed on his whole right side of his body. And so the year prior, he actually got a tracheostomy and a laryngectomy from cancer. So they had ripped out his throat. Last year, he had almost died too. So it's been a year that he's been recovered, no issues. But he's got a little button that he speaks with, but he's been happy and in a good mood and been doing great, healthy until this. And it's just like, you just never know when something like that's going to happen, right? And then it always seems like when the storm comes, so it just gets bigger and bigger, So that's kind of what's happened. And right now we're working on therapy and, trying to get him to be able to speak again. He's on liquid IVs and a feeding tube. So he doesn't eat. But yeah, so that's been happening over the last month.
How does he not die?
So a lot of people say my dad he's like a cat. He has 9 lives.
Yeah.
And, it's crazy because it's true. So he had cancer in the 90s. And then obviously, almost 30 years later comes back, right? He never stopped smoking. So he's smoking, 3 to 5 cigars a day, every day for years, right? And he always told me, he's like, I'd rather die than not live how I want to live my life.
Yeah.
Which I can respect that. But it does affect other people, right? How you treat yourself, how you treat your body, your health, especially for you, like you have kids, right? And so I always told him, I'm like, you need to take better care of yourself. But it was just not something that, he wanted to change his lifestyle for. So, it just is unfortunate. And he's gone through a lot in his life. I mean, he's 75. So to be able to get to this point and, smoke all that time and actually be able to go through and realistically last year he was in a coma for 4 months when that laryngectomy happened. So he was asleep for 4 months in the hospital. We had to keep him down because the swelling in his neck from all the cancer and stuff had swollen up.
It would have just closed him up.
Yeah. So he had a tube in there for 4 months and then they kept him on IVs and liquid or IVs and antibiotics for 4 months until that resolved. And then once it did resolve, then he brought them out of the coma. So that he was able to start talking and then had the button installed. Yeah. So, I mean, he already survived death once, and this was just his, second time.
How old's your dad?
He's 75.
I want to talk about his infamous quote that you just said. I'd rather die than not live how I want to live, right?
Yeah.
So I've been riding motorcycles since I can remember as a kid. It's my main passion in my entire life.
Right.
For the majority of my life, I rode very fast sport bikes on the street, up the canyons, the whole deal, right? I started having kids. My wife's like, either before we got married, either you need to sell the motorcycles or we're not getting married. And I'm like, then we're not getting married. Like that's how I was. I was this attached to
motorcycles. Your outlet.
She's like, okay, I guess we can figure it out, right?
Right.
And her dad, when she was young, was a motor officer and was in an accident and in a coma for several months and very traumatic for her and her family, right? So I understand why she's not a fan of this thing.
Yeah.
Start having kids. My street riding becomes less and less. but it's like, hey, I'm a skilled enough rider that I like trained the whole deal.
Mhm.
I know nothing's going to happen to me,
Mhm.
right? I start going to the track and I realize that riding at the track, although your speeds are much higher, sustained speeds are much higher, it's a much safer environment, right? Because you're meant to be able to crash safely at the track. Whereas on the road, you go down at 100, you're dead kind of thing. So, dude, I had never seen in my almost 15, 20 years of riding, I had never seen somebody with my own eyes go down until 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, I'm driving in the fast lane. Okay. Not the carpool lane, but the next lane over. And a guy comes zipping around me on a sport bike, no helmet.
Right.
And every time I'd see this in my life, I'd say a little prayer like, God, please protect this guy. Like,
right.
That's super dangerous.
Yeah, really.
Right?
Dangerous.
At least I was wearing gear and like taking the right precaution.
Right.
And 200 meters or so up the road, you see these sparks fly. And I'm like, oh no. And the traffic comes to a screeching halt.
Right.
And literally 15 seconds after I saw this guy with life, I see him face down, dead in the middle of the road. Limbs everywhere, his head split wide open. I was actually on a work call.
Really?
And when I saw this happen, I went silent. I was actually on the phone with you. So my production manager, who's in the room, I was on the phone with him when this happened. And I like went quiet and they're like, you good? And I'm like, no, like, I need some time. I need to call you back. And so
it's a lot. It's a lot to see.
I share that story, Andrew, and I want to get your perspective on this because it's like, that was somebody's, and by the way, my father-in-law, my wife's dad, who was in this accident, then became a homicide detective for the last 10, 15 years of his career, where every single day he's investigating motorized vehicle accidents that involve a death, a homicide, every day.
Yeah, I believe it.
So the stuff he's seen, right? And I mean, we're going to talk about your firefighter, some of your firefighter stories, but it's like, man, that was somebody's son or boyfriend or husband or brother or uncle or nephew. I mean, the hole that he now left because he chose to go out there with no helmet and act like an idiot. Dude, that's a huge hole, right? So it's like, I refuse to street ride now. And I really haven't in the last couple of years because I've had friends die. I've had friends be in very bad accidents. And you have to, it's the same as guests I've had on the show who have either had drug problems themselves or they've had a significant other with drug problems. It's like, dude, you got to sort that out because it's not if, it's when. And when that happens, the hole that you're going to leave in somebody's life is massive. So how do you think about this? The idea that we should rather, like I would rather die than not live how I want to live.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's risk and reward, you know, if that's something that's truly your outlet, then I think that you should do it to an extent, you know, depending on the risk, because it's true. Like if everyone just sat in their homes all day and did nothing, you know, what's the point? You know? So, I mean, obviously for me, it's like I decided to become a firefighter. So I'm probably not, you know, the best person to ask about risk and reward, you know, because we risk a lot, you know, sometimes for a little, and then sometimes we risk a lot for a lot, you know. We've done both sides, and we actually have a model where, you know, you're not supposed to risk your life for little things, right? Sometimes when buildings are on fire or houses are on fire and there's pets inside, we have to determine whether, or even people, you have to determine whether it's even possible for you to make it out alive. You know what I mean? That's the hardest decision. Is like, sometimes it's like, and for me, it's like, you know, I treat animals like people. I want to go and be able to save them just as much as I want to save a baby or a person. And I don't think people really realize how busy, you know, the fire department is here in Phoenix. I mean, we're one of the busiest fire departments in the country. You know,
Really?
I mean, on average, the houses are running 12 to 15 calls a day, sometimes 20, sometimes even more. And when an average call takes 20 to 45 minutes, I mean, you're working all day, it's nonstop. So I think the risk and reward is tough because it's different for everyone. And it just kind of depends. Like for us, obviously, we get a huge value of serving our community and being able to risk our lives for other people. And so that's a huge reward internally, And so for me, it's worth it, and it has been. And it's one of the best things that I've ever been able to do. And it's one of the greatest opportunities. And I always recommend people always should go out and serve other people and do other things for other people, because you can't replace that feeling with anything else. So,
yeah. Do you think that most firefighters and police officers and military servicemen and women, I mean, do you think that most of them do it for the right reason?
I think that I think everybody's different. You know what I mean? Everybody's different why they do it. There's some people that go to the fire department because their family members are on. You know what I mean? And it's a legacy thing. I mean, in the Phoenix Fire Department, legacy is huge. I mean, there's people on with 15, 20 of their family members in the department. So it just depends. There's people who do it for right reasons. I felt like I did it for all the right reasons because I truly enjoyed the rush, the brotherhood, being able to serve others, being able to go out and like put out fires and, do different kinds of things every single day where you didn't know what your daily life would be. Right.
Yeah.
I just thought the whole thing was so exciting. You know what I mean? And I loved every minute of it. But everyone does it for different reasons. Some people are like, well, I couldn't find anything else. Some people are like, this means a lot to me and I want to go serve my community. And then some people just want to go fight fires. Some people just want to run medical calls. So everyone's different why they want to go and serve. And at the end of the day, I mean, we just need more people to serve. So it's just become overwhelming with the amount of calls versus the amount of people. And right now, Phoenix is such a growing city that, I mean, realistically, they need more service members in every aspect,
What do you think the main reason why, there aren't more qualified people to do these types of jobs is?
I think that the quality comes from, I mean, obviously you have to be in shape and that, but I think it's really the quality of customer service, and attention to detail, which honestly, it's just hard right now because I think a lot of people are in a bad place where, money's tight. People are just very stressed, worried, and with money tight comes all the things with, people's health, because it requires money to stay healthy, and not necessarily, but I mean, there's for people who are older, like my dad, like it's very expensive for his care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that kind of wears on people, to not be at their prime, to be able to operate in those kind of emotional, stressful settings. Cause it is difficult, even for me, you know what I mean? Even for me to see a lot of the things I see, it really is hard. And sometimes it's hard for you to go out and find help or talk to people, and you just feel like you want to internalize it, because that's not something I want to speak to my mom about.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell her, hey, I just saw someone shot last night.
Yeah.
It's just, so it's hard,
How do you, so we're going to talk about some of these stories that you've shared with me with firefighting, which I think are, incredibly traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
But as it pertains to your father,
Mm-hmm.
I think most people's biggest fear is the loss of a parent, loss of a spouse,
100%.
or loss of a child. How do you handle this? I mean, it seems like you're maybe the main caretaker for your dad, or one of them.
I'm pretty much the main person there, since my sister has a daughter She lives up here. She's got a husband, and I think it's just hard when you have a kid. She's also pregnant right now, having her second kid.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So yeah, I mean, she kind of helps out with a lot of the admin stuff, hospital stuff, and then I'll go down physically and try and see him as much as possible.
Yeah.
So we kind of work as a team in that regard. So it's tough, but I mean, my dad has taken care of me for my whole life, you know, and so it's the least that I could do for him.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Emotionally, as he goes through some of these health challenges, I mean, what does this do to you emotionally? Like, how do you cope with that on a day-to-day basis, knowing that he could pass away at any time?
So I think for me, I mean, obviously I've seen a lot of death in my life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was a firefighter for 5 years. So, you know, I've seen hundreds of people die. And you get to this point where you kind of become numb and used to it, but it's a lot different when it's your family and people you know. It hits completely different. It's almost harder.
Yeah.
Not it's almost harder. It's extremely hard. And I think it almost makes it even worse because I've seen so many people go through that, and then you feel it with your family and it feels like 10x, right? And I feel like I'm overwhelmed with emotions with it. But if you knew my dad is like the modern, like he reminds me a lot of like Charlie Sheen, you know, like he's got that persona. And like, no matter what bad things happen, he's always good. Like even after he came out of his coma, like he was like this, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've never seen a man go through so much pain more than my dad. And I've seen a lot of stuff, you know? So it's crazy to see that and know that even when the cop showed up and broke into his house and he was down and had a stroke for 5 days, the first thing the cop did when she called me, she said, he's in bad shape. But the first thing he did when he asked, are you okay, is he gave a thumbs up, you know? So that like means a lot. And it's like, he just will not allow life to get him down no matter what. And that's like what I try to internalize is like, no matter what happens to you in life, like you're going to be okay, you know? So it's just, you have to be able to go through the storms to get to the sunshine, you know? And it's tough, but like there will be sunshine. You just have to get through that storm, and you just gotta get close to the people who are there for you and stay close to them until, you know, you can ride it out. And if you have the right people in your life and the right mindset, you can get through anything, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing. I envision, I mean, God forbid, hopefully your dad's around a lot longer. Seems like he's a tough one to take down.
Yeah.
But I envision on his funeral program, if you guys decide to do that, a thumbs up that just says it'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that seems like that really embodies who he is.
Yeah. And that's something my mom has said to me. So both my parents met through Scientology. They're not Scientologists anymore, but they were for 10 years. My dad went through rehab 3 times, couldn't get clean. And then he found the Church of Scientology and met my mom.
Interesting.
In California. So we're from San Francisco. And they met there. And honestly, I think there's like a huge misconception about Scientology just because like it really is about just bettering yourself. It's not necessarily a religion. It's like a belief system to just really like make yourself better, right?
Yeah.
They truly believe in, you know, getting your IQ up and working out and vitamins and just being the healthiest version of yourself. And so they found each other through the Scientology church. And one thing that my mom's always said that she learned in Scientology is like, in the end, it will be okay. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you practice Scientology?
No.
You never got into it?
No.
They were already out of it by the time you came along?
Yeah. Well, they were still in it for like maybe 5 more years, but my uncle and my aunt are both priests and nuns for the Catholic Church in California.
So did you grow up religious at all?
I did not.
So you never had it?
Yeah, it was kind of a tug of war, and we just weren't really pressured. My parents were more like, you know, they just wanted to be there for us, and they didn't feel like we needed to go to church to, you know, find God or find religion. They never pressed any of that stuff onto us. And honestly, like, me and my sister have turned out very, very well. My sister's very successful, lives in Arcadia, has a family, lives in a $1 million house, you know, lives an amazing life. And she's been a boss since she was 16, always having side jobs. Started working at Nordstrom, was a manager by like 20 years old in the shoe department, then started flipping houses. And she's the reason why I started flipping houses, you know, because she was doing it in Scottsdale. And I was like, God, this girl is just killing it. I'm like, I got to get in on what she's doing. So yeah, I mean, I think that my parents did a really good job at raising me and my sister. And I think I look back on my life and I have no regrets on.
Let me ask you this. So as somebody who's never been religious or part of a religious organization, you've never been baptized into any.
I was baptized when I was a baby, but but I just never practiced.
Yeah. So somebody that's never, like, what is your view on this whole thing? Just this life? Like, what do you think this is all about?
I think that it's a hard question, but like, for me, I don't focus on the big picture, because to me, I feel like I'll never know what the big picture is. And I just know, like, for me, like, my parents are like the cornerstone of life. Like, I'm best friends with my mom and my dad. I speak to them each probably 30 minutes a day on the phone. Wow. Every single day.
Wow.
And I love that. You know what I mean? My parents were born in the 50s. So they're old school, and they have a lot of knowledge. My whole family, I just have a really, really good family. And so I'm very thankful for that. And that motivates me to want to have my own family, you know, which I'm not at that point right now, right? I'm still at this point where, you know, I'm still single and trying to figure it out. But it's like, I see how well my parents did, and I want to recreate that. And everything outside of that, the big picture of life and where you go when you die and all that, is just something that I'm going to face when I get to that point. But I want to focus on what's in front of me, because I know that that's the greatest path to success, right? One foot after another.
Yeah.
And when you try to take on too many things, you know, you get holes in the boat. You start onboarding water. So to me, it's like, life is what you make it. And if you know something makes you happy, and like, to me, progress makes me happy, building things, right? Helping other people. And that's all I want to be able to do in this life, and leave this life and people to be like, wow, he was a really good person.
Yeah. It's amazing. I heard a quote by a friend of mine. I don't recall where this originated, but he said this. He said, when we're laying on our deathbed, we will not be remembered by how handsome we were, how jacked we were, how much money we had, how much things we had, our boats, our houses, none of this.
Right.
So the only thing that we'll be remembered by is how we made people feel.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, you've talked about your dad. I mean, my dad, to me, is the ultimate example of that. It's like, people know Wayne Hall as somebody who makes you feel good.
Wow.
Right. So I appreciate that point of view, that perspective. It's not often that you run into somebody that's never had a religious affiliation, right? Everybody seems to have some kind of past with it, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of these firefighting stories. I think the audience is going to find these fascinating, helpful, maybe traumatic. There'll be a lot of words. Can you describe in detail the events of your day, February 2nd, 2020, from the time you woke up to the time that you went to bed.
Yeah. And I think when we had talked about it, so it was actually 2 years prior. So I think it was 2018. So
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
So it was actually right before I got on the fire department. And so essentially I was actually working as a security guard. So I was working in Old Town, and I was basically a VIP manager of a nightclub. So I sold the tables for that venue. And actually I had gone through the Mesa Community College Fire Academy, and essentially my captain and maybe 3-4 other guys from the Tempe Fire Department had actually come in. I was super excited because it was just randomly they popped in. They're like,
All your
"Hey,
guys.
we wanted to say hi," and so essentially they came in. I got them shots. They ended up, leaving the bar. They were all fine, and they were like, "Hey, give us a call once you're off." I told them I'd be off at 1 a.m. So I get off at 1. I was like, I'm going to run to my car. I live right down the street. So I was like, I'll probably run to my house real quick, change. And so then I come out and I'm walking to the parking lot, and I see this tarp over this body, and I see 4 Phoenix fire trucks, some Scottsdale fire trucks. And I'm walking to my car, and I'm like, oh God, I probably shouldn't go up and ask what's going on. But I'm like, that definitely looks like someone was killed, right? Because they had tarped a body. And people are crying, and there's so many people out there because everyone was like, had heard about what was going on. And I'm like, what's happening? And I'm trying to get the story. No one's really telling me. And so I'm like, okay, do we know who it is? No one knows what's going on, right? So I leave. They're like, hey, we need everyone to, leave the area. So I get in the truck, and I'm like, God, something is weird, and I drive home, come back in the morning, and this girl who I work with, who was really good friends with, Kyle Brayer, who was the Tempe fire captain. And actually they had, she had told me, she's like, hey, it was Kyle who had got shot last night. And I broke down, right? Because this was my fire captain in the Mesa Community College Fire Academy. And he was also my neighbor, the year prior. So I knew him, to a pretty good extent, where he was someone I looked up to, right? He did, 8 years in the Marine. I think he was 10 years in the Tempe Fire Department. He was a captain, paramedic, great guy, great person, great mentor, great firefighter. And when I heard that, it just internally broke me so bad, because he was the person that I wanted to be. You know what I mean? I looked up to him, and he had everything that I wanted, right? And it's like, I was just a security guard. And so I was testing to get on the fire department. He was helping me. And I actually had my interview a month after with the Tempe Fire Department. So he was prepping me for my interview to get me on, right? And I just remember breaking down. I call all the guys, and start talking to the guys who were there. I went down and saw them at the station, talked to them. It was a disaster. People were just destroyed over the event. And I can tell you that going to that funeral was the hardest funeral that I've ever been to in my life, because everyone knew him as this American, golden American, everybody wants to be like this guy, right? Kyle just had it all, and he was such a good person and such a great firefighter. I mean, it's like any questions I had, he answer it on the spot like that. And you just don't find people like him. And so the amount of emotions that were going on at the funeral, I had never seen firefighters cry like that in my life, and these are people who are on for 20 years, who've seen some of the most traumatic things in life. And it really set the fire in me that I was like, you know what, I'm going to get on the fire department and I'm going to do this, not just for myself, but for Kyle in his memory, because he put so much time into helping me, and so
I feel like you owed it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. What actually happened?
So when I had the story that had happened was he had left the club. He walked outside. They got on a golf cart and they were actually driving towards Boondocks, and a car behind them bumps into the cart, actually runs into the cart, and he's sitting on the back, and he's like lifting up his legs, trying not to get crushed by this car that keeps bumping the cart. So as a 20-year-old kid, and he hops off, he's like, what the hell are you doing? And the 20-year-old kid pulls out a Glock and just dead shoots him straight in the head. One bullet in the head kills him for no reason. And all the other guys like hop off, right? The kid drives off, hits 4 or 5 cars, and he leaves. And no one knew who it was. He had, at that point, he had not gotten caught. No one saw it. No, they only knew what type of car it was. And he was dead. Just like that.
Over that.
Never knew the kid. All of the firefighters testified. So a week later, this runs on the news, right? Kyle Brayer, Tempe fire captain, dead, shot in the head in Old Town. And the kid confesses. He turns himself in. And he's like, I feel so bad, because he had seen all of the great things. They were playing all his achievements on the news. So this kid turns him in. And when he turns himself in, the first court date, the entire Tempe Fire Department lined the halls as he walked down the halls, and they all stared down at him. This 20-year-old kid. And he ended up pleading guilty, and every single person testified against him. And yeah,
he's got life.
I'm not sure what the terms exactly were, but yeah, I mean, he's in prison,
Jeez. I'm not saying that Kyle did anything wrong there. I obviously wasn't there. I've just heard this story for the first time. But there's a lesson that I like to share often, which is no matter what, you've got to keep your composure.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know.
Yeah.
Especially with road rage type incidents.
Yeah.
It's like you just don't know.
Right.
You don't know who this lunatic is that's bumping the cart.
Right.
You have no idea. So you got to keep your emotions. And again, I'm not saying Kyle did anything wrong, but it's a good lesson for people listening that you just never know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that definitely changed my life, because I think after that, my work ethic had increased a lot, because I felt so passionate about getting there.
Yeah.
Because before I was really passionate. And then after that, I felt like, it had happened for a reason.
Yeah. You told me a story about a veteran. Can you unpack that one for us?
Yeah. So I was working at Station 3 downtown Phoenix. And we actually had a call at like 2 a.m. for a car accident. It was a semi truck that had hit a Kia. And usually when initially when you get those calls in the fire station, you're like, oh, this isn't good. right? Because anytime a semi truck goes on head with
do
one of
some
those,
damage.
yeah, it's going to
Yeah.
do some damage. So we got there. My assignment was to go to the semi truck first and assess the two patients. So it was a man and a wife. He was a World War II veteran, much older guy, and him and his wife had this trucking business, right? And so they just drive all the country. After he had served the military for 20 something years, they started this business together. And he's like, he's kind of prefaced it a little bit. And I talked to the guy and he's like, are they okay? And I hadn't gone and assessed the Kia, but from the back, you couldn't really see what was happening, right? You saw that they had hit a pole because I guess he had been going through the intersection, took a left, and the Kia had come straight, hit the car, and then kind of deflected off the semi truck into a pole. And so I knew there was two other occupants in the Kia. And I was like, I don't know, I'll check with them in a little bit, but I need to assess your vitals, right? So we go through, assess his vitals, everything's fine, him and his wife. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go check on the other two, check in with the other two firefighters on the Kia. So we go over there, and both occupants had a pole basically going straight through them from the stop sign and some of the other poles that were out there. So they were both just completely dead, right? And this is always the hardest part, is seeing something like that is hard, but telling people is a lot harder. Talking about it is a lot harder than seeing, at least in my experience. And so I went back and I told him, I said, hey, unfortunately, both passenger and the driver have deceased. They're no longer here. And he started crying, and he looks at me and he goes, I fought for this country for 20 years. And you're telling me that after fighting for the people, to protect the people of this country, that I've just killed 2 American citizens. And I just was like speechless, because he broke down crying, and I'm like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. You mentioned that Phoenix, this area is one of the highest, or like sort of busiest areas in all of the country for call volume, right? You said many days, 20 calls a day. Mm-hmm. How do you compartmentalize this stuff? Like, how do you go out and see poles through the middle of somebody's chest?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Gunshot wounds to the face. I mean, just burn victim. You see, how do you like separate what you see in your day to day from your real life?
It's tough. I mean, for me, especially at first, it was an adjustment, and then it's something you get used to, like anything else. But it's never comfortable. It's always new challenges, new things you see. And it's a very uncomfortable environment all day, right? Yeah. Not sleeping, waking up all night. One of the worst calls that I had ever seen after running 24 calls in a day, it was the busiest day I've ever had. We had some of the most traumatic calls. I mean, we literally had shown up to a man's house where he had executed his 2 dogs and his wife, and then shot himself in the face and still lived, and called the police and 911. And we showed up, he was still alive with a bullet in his head. And we got him back in the ambulance, and everyone's looking at each other like, this guy just executed his whole family. And now he called us to save him. It's like, you just can't make it up. And all of us, we start working on him. By the time we get to the hospital, he passes away, just due to blood loss. But I have to show up the next day, and I remember at the time I had a girlfriend, and I had to show up the next day, and she has 2 kids. I show up the next day, and I just have to have a smile on my face. Hope you have a great day. Have a good day at school. And it's really tough to do that. And I could only imagine, actually having a wife and kids, and some of the guys that are on the department, who actually have to go through that and then have, sick kids or a sick wife or whatever. You know what I mean? For me, I look at it like it's a lot easier for me because of me being in my position, but it's very hard to internalize a lot of the things we see. And then we feel like we have to be tough men and not talk about things, and so there's a huge separation of guys in the fire department who are the tough guys, and they're like, just figure it out. And then you have guys who are like, hey, we need to be talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a fine line of, you have to be strong. And on the other side, you need to be able to talk about things, because there's a lot of guys and a lot of crazy things that happen on the fire department that people don't know about.
There's just internalize it, bottle it up.
I've seen guys pour gasoline all over their family's home with the kids and the wife in it. There's suicide, there's drugs, there's things that happen in the fire department people don't talk about. And it's hard because they see so much stuff. And I don't think people really realize what we go through, and what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then on top of all that, not to have this, the sleep deprivation, and not be able to do that. And a lot of these guys work overtime because they don't make enough money to have a family just on our normal salary, because we don't make very much money.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of struggles. People go through the financial issues, the drug problems, seeing everything you see, not sleeping. I mean, it's one of the hardest jobs, I think, in the world. And people just don't really recognize that. And on top of that, being in Phoenix and fighting fires when it's 120 degrees outside and training every morning.
Yeah.
Because that's what we have to do. Because if we don't train, we could either sacrifice someone else's life or our own.
Yeah.
So that's just what it is.
Maybe just a more curious question for me. So you've got can you help me understand how this works?
Mm-hmm.
Guy kills his whole family, tries to kill himself, lives, calls 911, says, here's what's happened. What happened? Does 911 dispatch
so immediately
police and fire at the same time?
Immediately. Yeah. Cause we're paramedics and EMTs. So we run the ambulance service and we're firefighters. So we call them rescues here, but they're ambulances.
Yeah.
There's 2 firefighters on that. And so there's a EMT and a paramedic. And then on the fire truck, there's 2 EMTs and 2 paramedics.
Always.
So you'll get, always.
Yeah.
So you get a team of 6 that come to your house if you call 911 for any medical emergency, or, we have miscellaneous like health checks, if you need fire detectors changed out, that kind of things. But every single gunshot wound, anything like that. We also do special operations. So when cops are in difficult situations that they might get hurt, then we will send ambulances in there to make sure that we're on standby for those officers in various situations.
Yeah.
So
you'll have 6 from fire show up, and then you might have
with
a handful of police show up at the same time.
Correct. Yeah.
Especially for something like that where there's weapons involved.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's tons of cops.
Like homicide.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We had a battalion chief. So our chief, we had a couple fire trucks, just because it's such a high intense situation, and he had a gun. He shot multiple people, so he could shoot multiple cops, which would mean, so we had 2 ambulances there. Wow. I just happened to be on the one that went straight in. And I had come out of a deep sleep at, 2:30 in the morning. Right. And we had been running all day. I think we were at 18 calls. We still ran probably 4 or 5 calls after that call. And my chief was like, hey, you guys should go home. You guys are not good. And we're at the end. We're not going to call people in. We just want to finish the shift. Yeah. And it's a pride thing. I think a lot of guys have a hard time leaving the station after seeing hard things. Plus, sometimes it's easier being able to talk to the people who just witnessed that. So it's hard,
Thank you to our sponsors over at Bucked Up. I love this company. I love their products, their apparel, and their supplements. Recently, they dropped the mother of all pre-workouts, Mother Bucker. This is not for the faint of heart. This will make you want to claw your face off. So don't get stuck in traffic when you're headed to the gym. I love these guys. I love this company, and I love their products. They are clearly the best tasting pre-workout on the entire market, and they're number one for a reason. Bucked Up is my favorite workout brand, hands down. And they also have my favorite apparel for working out and just for daily life. It's Lululemon-like quality, but for a fraction of the price that's affordable. So head over to their site, buckedup.com, where you can check it out. And for 20% off their entire site, use the code TylerHall20. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff you're working on professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're a young guy,
Mm-hmm.
you're killing it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a lot of people that listen to the show that are young
Yeah.
or old and not killing it, and they
Yeah.
want to learn how, right?
Yeah.
To segue into this part,
Mm-hmm.
do you think it's fair when somebody uses the analogy of firefighting or going to war when they
Mhm.
talk about business?
Yeah, I mean it is a firefight. I put out fires all day in my business, and I'm sure you do too, right? It seems like there's always, there's only a couple different points of business where it's like, you have your marketing and sales, and then you have your service and fulfillment and your
Yeah.
customer service. And it always seems like fires catch in every aspect or of that business. And you'll go to the front of the business and you'll fix your marketing, and then you might have a sales issue, right? And then you'll go back and you'll fix your sales issue, and then you might have a client fulfillment problem or a customer service issue. And then you go back and you fix that. So it's really just going back and forth, trying to put out the fires in your business. And that's literally what every one of my employees has ever told me. They're like, you're still firefighting, even when, you flip houses, or, we also do education. So I teach people how to flip houses and wholesale houses all over the country.
Yeah.
So, there's always going to be problems, and no matter what business you do, so it's 100% accurate.
Some people that are previous fire or say military
Mhm.
are offended by that nomenclature,
Mhm.
right? Because it's like, you don't know what going to war is actually like.
Right.
You don't know what actual firefighting is like, right?
Yeah.
But for you, you're like, it is what it is. Like,
yeah. I mean, they're completely different. You're putting out fires. You're definitely showing up every day. There's a stress level in both. I mean, I've felt that same level of stress. Like, I've almost gone bankrupt because of a house flip in California, where, we had a girl, we had paid $15,000 to move out, and she moved out. And then right when she moved out, I gave her the money. She moved back in and asked for more money, and then was doing drugs in my house in Richmond, California, and it was like, we had so much money tied up in the property. The buyers were ready to walk away because they're like, this girl doesn't want to leave the house alone.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a baseline of stress where you can only be so stressed, and I think I've pretty much experienced every level at this point in my life. I don't really think I can really endure much different stresses until I have kids or I have a wife,
sure.
to be honest.
Yep. So you teach people how to virtually flip houses with no money down that can make, I think you've claimed $10,000 to $50,000 a month.
Right.
How is that possible? How is this done?
So essentially what we do, and when I started, I didn't run ads like I do now, because when you run marketing, it's a little bit more expensive, but you could do it free, right? You could pull a list of foreclosures and call those people. And essentially what you're doing is you're finding a house and you're negotiating it at undervalue, right? And essentially you're going and finding a buyer who's willing to pay more for that house than what you got it for, right? Now it's your choice if you do work to it or if you don't do work to it, right? If you want to do the no money down route, by getting them under contract, you can actually flip that contract and the house over to that person for a fee. And if you get it at a good price, then yes, you can make 10, 20, 50, the most I've made is 77,000. And I just did that maybe 3 weeks ago. We got a house in San Jose. I got it at 1.4 million. And we sold it to an end buyer for cash at 1.512 million. And so after the realtor
minus fees,
I was about 77,000 cash. But I only had put down $100 earnest for that house. That was the, obviously I paid for the lead, $70 for the lead.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of expenses, took photos, $200, but pretty good return.
What are you telling the seller when you get them on the phone? So this lead comes in,
right?
You call them,
right?
What's your pitch?
So essentially what we do is we tell them, hey, we can purchase the home cash, but we do utilize end buyers, or we also can utilize like more of like a rental model. But at the same time, we tell people, hey, we want to close cash, but we will find an end buyer to come in. And it's essentially almost like a partnership model, right? It's like you're finding the deal, then you're going out and now you're finding someone to purchase that home directly. Yeah. And, we get 60 days, so we have plenty of time. That house sold in like 14.
Are these normally people that are going to occupy the home as their main residence, or are these investors?
It's a mixture.
Yeah.
It's a mixture. So we have a large buyers list. So we also pull like fresh cash buyers lists every month. From like wherever we get that asset. So like San Jose, right? We pull a list of all the cash buyers, and then basically we're selling it for under market value.
Sure.
And so people
everybody
come in.
Wins.
Yeah, everybody wants it because there's some equity. And so you have that, and then we also will list on the MLS. So the homeowners will let them know, hey, we're also going to list on the MLS, and they'll give us consent. And so what's crazy about it is you will negotiate a deal for less than what it's worth and be able to sell it to someone else and make a profit. And at the end of the day, these people want convenience. They want to be able to fill out a form online. They want you to call them. They want to sign a contract, and they want to get the deal done because they might have financial reasons. They might be going through a divorce. It's just like when you go to a car dealership, right? Most people sell their cars to the car dealership. Why? Because of convenience, right? And it's just you're there. You don't want to have to go out on the market and sell it yourself.
Sure.
So we capitalize on that. And, we've been able to do a lot of good for a lot of people because a lot of times these people don't have money. And so we can take over their mortgages, or we can help them with moving costs, or we can help them find a new house to relocate. And they get a lot of value out of that because they wouldn't be able to afford a $5,000 moving fee, right? Or we've had people move across the country and paid for that up front, but then gone and flipped the house and made 20 grand, So there's a lot of value for them, and there's a lot of value for us, right? And at the end of the day, we run YouTube ads all over the country, and we utilize AI to basically contact homeowners, right? So we'll have some AI that helps us. Basically, there's an algorithm, and with YouTube, you actually piggyback off of Google. So Google, if you type in "sell your house fast Phoenix, Arizona," then my ad would pop up when you go onto your YouTube.
Yeah.
And the whole point of
retargeting
that, yeah. So the whole point of that is we get it for that lead for half the cost, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're not paying top dollar for Google, you're on YouTube, right? But what's better about it is you have a video sales letter in front of them where, I have a 5-minute video of me speaking, hey, this is Andrew with Elevate Homes. We'd love to buy your house cash fast on your timeline. And there's not going to be any realtor fees, commissions. It's going to be net to you. And then I explain the process in depth, right? So then before they opt in, they already know the process and understand.
You've already kind of given it to
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've already made them understand what the process is like. And so then it just goes into, okay, are we able to get this house at a reasonable price that it makes sense for both parties, right? And is the timeline and everything makes sense, right? Obviously, if someone's like, hey, I want to sell my house in 6 months, it's probably not going to work out right now, especially because the market's been correcting. It's been a lot of stuff going on, especially with the election. So yeah, absolutely.
I want to wrap with this. You posted on social media an image of a quote that said, "You'll never make history in your comfort zone." You remember posting that?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
I mean, so like, for example, like I've never been good at interviewing. I was pretty nervous to come onto this podcast, especially like with emotional things. You know, I'm getting a lot better at talking about business. But that was the whole thing on getting on the fire department. I had to take interview classes, and it's very uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable getting in the gear. It's uncomfortable being in 115-degree heat. It's uncomfortable going in front of, 10, 15 firefighters and giving your life story on why you should, get the opportunity to work for that fire department and serve their people, and they should trust you with their lives, because at the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so it was the most uncomfortable time going through that process, right? Trying to say, hey, can I do this? Is this for me? Am I the right fit? Right? And you go through that and you get on, and then you achieve such a high level in your mind of like, I feel successful. I feel, all the things in life that I've worked for have been accomplished. And then you think, what is next? What is next? I liked being uncomfortable at a certain point, to where I was like, I can do this. I can do anything I want. Anyone can. Right. And it's just, you just have to put your mind to it that no matter what you want in this life, you can go get it if you're willing to put in the work. Right. And that's always what my captain used to say to me, Kyle. Like, he would say, like, anything, like, you can go get anything in this world if you're willing to put in the work. Right. And it's just, you have to pay the price, and it's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to like it. But I can promise you that it will be worth it in the end. But it's going to be difficult, but it'll be worth it in the end.
Amen to that. Brother, thanks for coming on. Thank you for being vulnerable, sharing these stories. I think this was incredible, and I'm grateful that you and I know each other and are starting to develop a relationship.
Yeah.
So
appreciate you having me on, and everything. It's been a great experience. So thank you so much.
Thanks. That's a wrap.